Dr. Chibber for inviting me here. Thank you, Harsh. And I'd like to welcome all of you here this evening. Today happens to be the 11th of September, so I'd like to start by paying homage to all the people who died on this day and all the people who lost loved ones. We stand with them today in their memory. As a politician, we get to go to many places and listen to many different people. And I'm going to start today by telling you a little story. Many years ago, you'd remember that there was a huge tsunami that came to India. And it hit the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And one of the things that we were doing at the time was trying to send aid to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And I was looking at a list of people who had died. And there's many communities who live on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And I noticed in the list that there were absolutely no tribal people who had died. So I asked some of the people there, I said, listen, how has this happened? I said, there's many people who've died. There's lots of tribals living in Andaman and Nicobar, but I don't see a single tribal person who's died in this tsunami. What happened? So then one of the people there told me, they said, you know, Mr. Gandhi, when a tsunami comes, the sea goes out. And when the sea goes out, huge numbers of fish are left stranded. And he said the tribals, they knew that when a tsunami goes out, when the tsunami comes in, just prior to it, the sea goes out. Whereas the non-tribals didn't know this. And when the tsunami came, the sea went out, all the non-tribals ran to get the fish. And all the tribals ran into the hills. And some of the tribals told the non-tribals that don't go there. You're going to get killed. But they didn't listen. They ran into the sea. And that's why no tribals died. And as a liberal today, that's exactly how I feel. Everybody knows that something has gone very wrong in the system. And the right-wing politicians are saying, go there and pick up the fish. And people are sort of looking at the simple answers. They're looking at the simple answers, but you're not going to get a result from the simple answers. And one of the reasons I've come here, and this is a tremendous institution, but this institution believes in a liberal ideology, it believes in discussion, it believes in listening to people, it believes in conversations. And you have a tremendous history, and I respect that history. As you, Mr. Chibber, said, my great-grandfather came here and gave a speech. So I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm going to speak for about 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to have a conversation. You can ask me all the questions you'd like. India is a massive country. It is also one of the world's most complex countries. Every time you think you've understood India, she will reveal something new to you. In fact, I would venture to say, anyone who thinks he understands India is a fool. According to most Western academics and intelligence agencies in the middle of the last century, India was supposed to fail. We are 29 states covering every religion in the world. We have 17 official languages and hundreds of different dialects. and a terrain that runs from the Himalayas all the way to the desert. Most of these experts didn't expect India to survive. They predicted it would fall apart, torn to pieces by its own diversity and contradictions. And yet somehow, as Indira Gandhi said when asked whether India leans left or right, India came out standing straight and tall. The idea of non-violence, or ahimsa, as we call it in India, is what has allowed this huge mass of people to rise up together. Uniting India's religions, castes, and languages would simply be impossible without it. It is this idea that Mahatma Gandhi fashioned into a powerful but beautiful political weapon. The common conception in the West is that people have ideas. You all say, I have an idea. But there's an alternative way of looking at the world. The counterintuitive notion that instead of people having ideas, that ideas have people. So instead of I have an idea has me. This notion is the basis of ahimsa, or non-violence, as taught by Gandhi. If one accepts the notion that ideas capture people, then the only possible response to a person infected by a bad idea, any person, is love and compassion. The only action you can take against him is to try and rid him of the bad idea and replace it with a good one. Using violence against a person who is infected by a bad idea actually results in the idea spreading more aggressively, multiplying among the people who care for him and love him. This non-violent philosophy in action has traveled far beyond India. Non-violence is not inaction, Cesar Chavez said. It is not discussion. It is not for the timid and weak. Non-violence is hard work. It is this very idea, this beautiful struggle, that is viciously under attack in India today. But it is also the only idea on which humanity can survive the connectivity of the 21st century and come out unscathed stronger. The road traveled by India since independence has been difficult and filled with formidable obstacles. Our partition was the bloodiest migration in recorded history. At independence, most of our 400 million people were hungry. Yet the achievements of India have been significant. Increasing literacy, expanding healthcare, and raising life expectancy, all within a generation. Achieving self-sufficiency in food grains, averting famine, pushing huge advances in science and technology, even being a front-runner in the field of computer technology. When Mr. Rajiv Gandhi and my dear friend Sam Pitroda, who's sitting here, spoke about bringing the computer to India, there were voices that ridiculed them. In fact, a leader of the BJP who became prime minister later asked the question, what does India need computers for? Why do we need computers? Imagine that. When India built the IITs, the entire world, including many in India, were highly critical of the idea that a poor country should waste money on such technical institutions. They reacted to us with skepticism, wondering why a country like ours would need such institutions. Today, these IITs and other higher education institutions in India play a central role in Silicon Valley and the global progress of technology. And yet, look at us today. We are rightly proud. We have done that and more, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. For everything everyone says about India, there is no democratic country in human history, and I'll repeat that, there is no democratic country in human history that has raised as many people out of poverty as India has. It has never been done. And we have not done it with violence. We've not done it by killing people. We have done it peacefully together. For the first time in our history, India, if it is steered correctly and faithfully, has the opportunity to wipe out poverty. If India is able to lift another 350 million people out of poverty by 2030, it would be an achievement of which the human race can be proud. Doing this will require us to grow at more than 8% over the next 13 years. India has done it before and can do it again. But it is imperative that India sustain a high growth rate for an uninterrupted period of 10 to 15 years in order to do so. At the heart of this powerful engine that India has built with its blood, sweat, and bare hands since 1947 are jobs and economic growth. No amount of growth is enough for India if it is not accompanied by the creation of jobs. It doesn't matter how fast you grow. If you're not creating jobs, you're not actually solving the problem. So the central challenge for India is jobs. Roughly 12 million young people, 12 million, enter the Indian job market every year. Nearly 90% of them have a high school education or less. India is a democratic country, and unlike China, it has to create jobs in a democratic environment. India does not have, and nor does it want, China's coercive instruments. We cannot follow their model of massive factories controlled by fear. Jobs in India are going to come instead from small and medium scale industry. India needs to turn colossal numbers of small and medium businesses into international companies. Currently, all the attention in India is paid to the top 100 companies. Everything is geared towards them. Banking systems are monopolized by them. The doors of government are always open to them, and laws are shaped by them. Meanwhile, entrepreneurs running small and medium businesses struggle to get bank loans. They have no protection and no support. Yet these small and medium businesses are the bedrock of India and the world's innovation. Big businesses can easily manage the unpredictability of India. They're protected by their deep, deep pockets and connections. But the real innovative strength of India lies with the millions of small firms and young entrepreneurs that run them. And they're relying on us to build the financial, communication, and political infrastructure that would allow them to turn their skills into global businesses. Healthcare in the 21st century is being revolutionized. Today, a doctor examines you, analyzes your data, and tells you what's wrong with you. All this is based on his memory. When he retires, that information is lost. Tomorrow, all the medical data is going to be digitized and accessible on computers. Two factors will determine competitiveness in healthcare. First, the type and volume of different medical processes and procedures that are taking place in a country. And second, the genetic diversity of your population. India's size will give it huge advantages. The sheer fact that India performs millions of cataract operations or heart surgeries a year, for example, means we are going to be the best at doing them. But much more important than scale will be India's rich genetic diversity. Thousands of years of cross-culturalism means that India has the world's most genetically diverse population. If medical processes are going to be based on DNA, then India's diversity is going to be a huge global asset. So if you're looking at medical processes in the 21st century, by far the best opportunities for groundbreaking research and innovation will be in India. It is imperative that we start thinking about these systems now, and while addressing the critical concerns of privacy and ownership before they arise. Done properly, this can transform India's healthcare system, and while at the same time, help the world beyond our borders. India has triggered a massive process of human transformation. The nature of India's transformation has now reached a stage where its momentum is so powerful that our failure is no longer an option. Our success impacts the world, But should our country fail, it will shake the entire world. What India is trying to do is to connect 1.3 billion people into the global economy with minimum disruption possible in a peaceful and compassionate way. But don't be confused. If this process breaks down, the potential for violence is massive. I've given you the positives. So before I end, I need to tell you what can go dangerously wrong. Our strength so far has been that we have done all this peacefully. What can destroy our momentum is the opposite energy: hatred, anger, and violence, and the politics of polarization, which has raised its ugly head in India today. Violence and hatred distract people from the task at hand. Liberal journalists being shot, people being lynched because they are Dalits, Muslims killed on suspicion of eating beef. This is new in India and damages India very badly. The politics of hate divides and polarizes India, making millions of people feel that they have no future in their own country. In today's connected world, this is extremely dangerous. It isolates people and makes them vulnerable to radical ideas. Finally, listening to India is very important. She will give you all the answers that you seek. India's institutions have over 70 years built a profound understanding of our country. We have experts in every single field. Ignoring India's tremendous institutional knowledge and taking ad hoc decisions is reckless and dangerous. Decisions like demonetization, which removed 86% of cash from circulation overnight and was carried out unilaterally without asking the chief economic advisor, the cabinet, or even parliament, imposes a devastating cost on India. Currently, we are not producing enough jobs. 30,000 new youngsters are joining the job market every single day. 30,000. And yet, the government is only creating 500 jobs a day. And this does not include the massive pool of already unemployed youngsters. The decline in economic growth today is worrying and is leading to an upsurge of anger in the country. The government's economic policies, demonetization, and a hastily applied GST have caused tremendous damage. Millions of small businesses were simply wiped out as a result of demonetization. Farmers and manual laborers who use cash were hit extremely hard. Agriculture is in deep distress, and farmer suicides have skyrocketed across the country. Demonetization, a completely self-inflicted wound, caused approximately 2% loss in India's GDP. India cannot afford to grow and create jobs at the current rate. If we continue at the current rate, if India cannot give the millions of people entering the job market employment, anger will increase, and it has the potential to derail what has been built so far. That will be catastrophic for India and the world beyond it. Thank you.
You've stressed the need for designing a good, strong vision for any party, for the Congress to revive its fortunes. Now, you also need someone to sell that vision effectively. And Mr. Modi has done that quite well for the BJP. Now, you know, when the UPA was in power, there was a huge clamor to have you come into the executive, become a cabinet minister. Some said prime minister. In 2014, they wanted you to be prime ministerial candidate, which you declined. And you're very likely going to face the same demand in 2019. So, are you ready to now take charge in take charge of executive role in the Congress party?
I'm absolutely ready to do that. But the way our party works, we have an organizational election process that decides that. And that process is currently ongoing. So we have an internal system where we elect certain delegates who make that decision. So for me to say that decision is mine, that wouldn't be very fair. That's a decision that the Congress party has to make, and that's a process that's currently going on right now.
But you are open to it?
Yeah, sure.
Some of the reasons institutions don't work is corruption, and people in the audience are asking, which is that, you know, there's a fair bit of corruption in India, and your party is, for right or wrong, been stigmatized by it. So what do you think should be done to actually address this issue?
I think there's two things. One of the things that we did was the right to information. And what the right to information did was massively increase transparency. So a lot of the problem that we faced was actually because of a massive increase in transparency that we created, which, by the way, Mr. Modi has shut down. So Mr. Modi has basically clamped down on the RTI, on the right to information. So the amount of information that was flying around in our time is simply not flying around. So one reason we got into quite a lot of trouble was because we dramatically increased the amount of transparency. But if you want to take on corruption in India, corruption happens because of arbitrary centralized power. You have to crack arbitrary centralized power. You have to decentralize power. Unless you decentralize power, you're not going to take on the corruption issue.
You mentioned some of that you're trying your best within the Congress to move away from this dynastic system. You've had a lot of internal reforms you've tested out, one of them being the primaries at the local level. But some of them have run into roadblocks, many of them, in fact. And you also attributed to this, to the struggles of navigating between the young and the old. And have you found that being a big issue and roadblock for you as you've gone ahead with your reform agenda in the Congress?
You know, my earlier approach was that one should push young people, regardless. I still believe that as many young people as possible should be pushed forward. But there's tremendous talent in the Congress party with some of our senior people. And, you know, it's really unfair to say that, you know, just because you happen to be slightly old, we're not going to utilize you. So it's a mix. It's trying to make both these systems work together. Both young and old work together. You know, you know how India works. There's sort of egos and stuff like that.
You started speaking of removing poverty and through the actions of small-scale industry and businessmen. That sounds to me like a shift away from the old socialist vision that has characterized the Congress party for a long time. And even within the Congress party, I think there was an op-ed written in the Hindustan Times recently arguing for a more leftward shift in the Congress party. But you seem to be arguing and articulating a slightly more center-right vision, at least as far as economics is concerned. Is that where you think the party should go?
The left-right idea, it works very well in Europe and the United States. It doesn't work so well in India. I'll give you an example, right? In the 70s, Congress party does bank nationalization. It's the same party that does liberalization. And they're the opposite thing, right? And then you can see that the same party on one hand is doing liberalization, on the other hand is doing Narega, right? So actually, what the Congress party does is respond to situations. I mean, people say, oh, you know, building the public sector in the 60s was not a good idea. Well, there was no way of building anything other than the public sector in the 60s. But the Congress party moves from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to 2000 to 2010. So we're not really bound by whether this is left or it's right and we're going to shape ourselves as a left party or right party. We're saying, listen, what needs to be done? Do we need to push small businesses? Is that good for India? Good, let's do it. Do we need to support agriculture? Good, let's do it. There might be a contradiction, but you can't carve the Congress party in that way.
You feel that at some level right now, the vision, ideology, just exactly what the Congress stands for, that messaging is getting lost as it reaches voters?
No, I don't. I think for us, we have never had a top-down vision. So you know where Narega came from? Narega came from a district in Maharashtra. A junior Congress guy in a district found a collector doing Narega. And he was like, wait a minute, this sounds interesting. And then it was brought in, and then it became a national program. So, whereas the BJP gives the top-down vision, we construct a bottom-up vision. And we're actually in the process of doing that. We spent 10 years with our old vision. That served India. Highest economic growth that India ever had was when we were in government. Narega transformed rural India. RTI was an extremely powerful program. But these were all programs that they came from the bottom. And that's the process that we're doing right now.
But that idea that the Congress is delegative and there are discussions actually runs counter to the common perception, at least among the media and among academics and among lots of people and among this audience which wants to know, but isn't the Congress party associated with more dynastic politics?
Actually, most parties in India have that problem. So don't give us stick because Mr. Akhilesh Yadav is a dynast, Mr. Stalin is a dynast, Mr. Dhummal's son is a dynast. So, even Abhishek Bachchan is a dynast. I mean, that's how India runs. So I mean, don't get after me because that's how the entire country is running. By the way, last I recall, Mr. Ambani's kids were running their business. And that was also going on in Infosys, right? So that's what happens in India. But saying that, I do try to sort of change it in the Congress party. If you look at the Congress party, there's a large number of people who are actually not from dynastic families at all. And I can name them in every state. There are also people who did happen to have a father or a grandmother or a great-grandfather in politics. They do exist. There's not much I can do about it.
Directions a little bit. On a more personal level, there's a prevailing sentiment that Mr. Rahul Gandhi is a slightly reluctant politician, that you're not very accessible, not very open.
There's a machine, there's a BJP machine, about 1,000 guys sitting on computers that basically tell you about me. Okay, they tell you I'm reluctant, they tell you I'm stupid, they tell you all these things. You've seen me now, you guys got to make up your mind. Right? You got to figure that out. But realize that there is a tremendous machine, 1,000 people or so, that all they do is spread abuse about me. And the operation is basically run by the gentleman who's running our country. Basically.
I have there are a number of questions that have come up about, which you talked about, which is these local visions coming and the Congress trying to figure out what the right thing to do is by figuring out, through a bottom-up process. And I think that's laudable. But what happens often is that many of the programs and initiatives that people undertake get lost either in a bureaucratic morass. If you remember famously, your father said 15% of the money reaches, people at the bottom. So it's very easy on the one hand to say, let's do this and let's do this, but isn't administrative reform in some senses the key to all this? And what we've also discovered all over the world is that the hardest thing to do, and this is speaking from the university which has tried administrative reform and failed miserably, right? We have actually. The question is administrative reform on the one hand sounds good, but it's actually an extremely difficult thing to do. So do you have any ideas of making the state machinery work for the people? What do you think you can do to make that happen?
You know, administrative reform is important, but much more important than administrative reform is actually political reform. Today, the real problem in India is that our political machinery, the Lok Sabha, the Rajya Sabha, the Vidhan Sabha, they are not empowered the way they should be. So if you look at how decisions are made in the United States, laws are made by the Senate, right? So there are a large number of senators who have a discussion about any law that is made, and then people can go and talk to them and say, you know, I want you to support me on this law. That system simply doesn't exist in India. Laws in India are made by ministers and 5 or 6 people surrounding the minister. Until you make that process transparent, until you bring that process out into the open, you're not really going to transform the system.
So if the Congress party comes to power next time around, right, inshallah, as they would say, will you actually do this?
100%. I mean, that is the only thing I would do. To me, if you look at the Lok Sabha, 546 people, to me that should be 546 institutions, democratic institutions, each one fundamentally involved in lawmaking. Today our MPs, they don't make laws. They worry about building roads in villages. And they get punished for not building roads in villages or building roads in villages. They should be making laws. They should be empowered to make laws. That's their job. And that is the fundamental thing that's gone wrong in India. People say, you know, many people in the press write, oh, you know, why are there no discussions in parliament that are interesting? I'll tell you why there are no discussions in parliament that are interesting. There's no power in parliament. All the power is outside parliament. The power is in the prime minister's office or the minister's office. You make the members of parliament powerful, the discussion will start in the parliament house. So to me, taking India to the next level is about transforming how our parliament works, is about making sure that our members of parliament are actually involved in lawmaking, that they become part and parcel of the conversation of lawmaking. That would be one of the things that I would do.
There's some people have asked the question of, you know, the way forward, and there are people who are asking the question about what is the way forward in Kashmir, you think?
You know, for 9 years, I worked behind the scenes with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, with Mr. Chidambaram, with Jairam Ramesh, and a large number of people. And we worked silently on Jammu and Kashmir. When we started in 2004, terrorism was rampant in Jammu and Kashmir. By the time we finished in 2013, I went back and I hugged the Prime Minister. And I told him that, you know, one of your biggest successes is the end of violence in Jammu and Kashmir. In 2013, we had basically broken the back of terrorism in Kashmir. And we hadn't done it by giving big lectures and big stories. We hadn't done it by giving big lectures and stories. We had done it silently. I'll tell you how we did it. We did it by holding Panchayati Raj elections. We did it by linking women to banks, self-help groups. We did it by running a program of getting young Kashmiris, young people from Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, employment in other parts of India, bringing corporates to Jammu and Kashmir, having conversations like this with them, and building their confidence. In fact, the bodyguard who I went to Jammu and Kashmir is standing right here. And my way of measuring progress, I had two metrics. One metric was how many commercial flights are coming into Jammu and Kashmir. Because the more commercial flights, the more tourism, the more people are comfortable, the better we're doing. And the second was how close these guys stand to me. So if these guys are standing like all around me, we're not doing well. And if they're sort of loosening up a bit, we're doing well. So we went from practically no planes to 50 planes. And I remember one day in 2013, when I was looking around and I was like, where are my security guys? And they had like actually loosened up so much. And there was crowds all around me, 100, 200 people, and having a conversation. I went back there in 2014 and this gentleman was there with me. And this gentleman, these are his words, not mine. Let's get out of here right now. Otherwise, we're going to be in serious trouble. Right? What happened between 2013 and 2014 August? I'll tell you. Our strategy was to close the space for terrorists in Kashmir. We basically went in there and said young Kashmiris have two options. They can either be pro-India or they can be against India. Let's close the against India space. Let's find every little space we can find which is not pro-India and shut it down. And it took us 9 years. Panchayati Raj elections, suddenly the Indian government landed up right in the village. We had Pradhan sitting in the village, managing budgets of 1 crore, informing us exactly who the terrorists were. Students going to Bombay, to Karnataka, coming back and saying, you know what? Actually, there's opportunity here. So we gave the kids in Jammu and Kashmir a vision. And it was working. And then in 2014, the Indian government did something that inflicted a huge, huge strategic cost on India. Essentially, there are 4 political parties in Kashmir. There's the BJP on the extreme right. There's the Congress, Nationalist. There's the National Conference. There's the PDP. There's the Hurriyat. And then there's terrorists in Pakistan. The PDP was the instrument that brought young Kashmiri youngsters into the political process. And the day Mr. Narendra Modi made an alliance between the PDP and the BJP, he destroyed the PDP as an instrument that could bring youngsters into the political system. And the day he did that, he massively opened up space for the terrorists in Kashmir, and they came in. And you saw a massive increase in violence. The intelligence guys themselves in Jammu and Kashmir told me that large numbers of the PDP have suddenly gone towards the militants. When you take these strategic decisions to take a little bit of political advantage, you do tremendous damage to the country. Today, Jammu and Kashmir, the space in Jammu and Kashmir has been opened up, not only for the Pakistanis, for other players in the region. And it is going to impose a massive, massive strategic cost in India. Just one small decision. So when you go into the details of these things, the answers are not complicated. You talk to people, you give them hope, you give them a vision. It doesn't matter who they are. Whether they're from UP, Kashmir, anywhere. They will engage with you. You build trust with them, they will engage with you. It's not complicated. The reason it doesn't happen, those are complicated.
We've gotten quite a few questions on your view of the Modi government's performance. I know you mentioned a couple of things in your speech: demonetization, polarization, violence. What are the 2 or 3 key things that you wish they could improve on? And maybe the second part, what are 1 or 2 things that you think the government's actually doing well?
See, I'm an opposition leader, but Mr. Modi is also my Prime Minister. Mr. Modi has certain skills. He's a very good communicator, probably much better than me. He understands how to give a message to 3 or 4 different groups in a crowd. So his messaging ability is very subtle and very effective. What I sense, and this is something that actually would be very good if it happened. What I sense is that he doesn't converse with the people he works with. I mean, even members of parliament of the BJP come to me and tell me that you know, sunte nahi. Yeah.
No, please, no, please.
This is not free speech if you're controlling what you ask.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, I'll have a conversation with you after this. After that you can share it with them, but I'll happily have a conversation.
Please go ahead.
Carry on.
What carry on?
Where were we?
We were on, you were
Modi,
talking
Mr.
about the Modi government's performance.
So one thing that I think would be good is if he would speak to the people who work with him. I mean, there's a lot of information that the opposition, for example, has. And he's not really interested in that input. So that's one aspect of it. On what they've done well, what I like the concept of Make in India. But the orientation of Make in India is slightly different than what I would do. So the orientation of Make in India is big business, and a lot of it is defense. My orientation of Make in India would be small and medium businesses. See, big businesses in India already have a lot of play. So my thing would be to carve out a space for small and medium businesses and bring in experts like you from Silicon Valley and actually think about taking these small and medium businesses and transforming them, as I said, into global companies. So I do agree with the idea of Make in India. I like it. Orientation is slightly different. Swachh Bharat is something that Mr. Modi likes. The idea of hygiene, I think it's a good one. I don't think it's a bad one. And I think the sort of stuff that they're doing on open defecation and stuff like that, I think that's not a bad thing. I think on foreign policy, our basic design was have relationships with people around us. So we, of course, have a solid relationship with the United States that's only going to get better. And we accept that India and the United States are going to get closer. But we had a relationship with Russia. We had a certain relationship with Iran. So that balance, for example, Russia today is selling arms to Pakistan. It's not in our interest. They've never done it before. I mean, there are reports that the Russians are dealing with the Taliban. Unimaginable 10, 15 years ago. So, whereas I completely agree with their positioning as far as the US is concerned, I think they're making India vulnerable. Because if you look at Nepal, the Chinese are in there. If you look at Burma, the Chinese are there. If you look at Sri Lanka, the Chinese are there. If you look at Maldives, the Chinese are there. And in a lot of these places, these are tactical mistakes. Nepal was a tactical mistake. You know, the blockade, there was a tactical mistake. You basically lost Nepal because you made a tactical mistake. So my disagreement in the basic direction, my agreement in the basic direction, I agree. Friendship with the United States, close bond with the United States. But don't isolate India because it gets dangerous.